So what do you think all these people have in common? Does it look like the next big movie? Well, actually, all of them have something called dyslexia. It's not just actors, but what dyslexia is it's a blanket term for a pattern recognition disorder. So some people, basically what they have a hard time with is seeing patterns that people who don't have dyslexia don't have a hard time seeing. So some people see the words flipped, sometimes the words are jumbled, sometimes the words just kind of run together, sometimes it's just with numbers, sometimes it's just with letters. But a lot of times I'll get the question of, well, Amy, sometimes I see numbers backwards. And I would say that most of us reverse numbers when we write them down. That's very common. And occasionally it would be something that's happening all the time. And basically what you'd see with dyslexia is that it actually makes you tired because you have to work so hard to try to see the same patterns that someone else has no hard time with. Um, Here's some other famous people that have dyslexia: Thomas Edison, Albert Einstein, Alexander Graham Bell, Leonardo da Vinci, Ansel Adams, which is a photographer that does the black and white nature scenes, Tommy Hilfiger, Ian Marley, he's a contemporary artist in South Africa, Pablo Picasso, Andrew Warhol, Cher, John Lennon, Muhammad Ali, Thomas Jefferson, John F. Kennedy, Woodrow Wilson, George Washington, Richard Branson. He's a pretty famous millionaire who did the Virgin Airlines and Virgin Enterprises. Henry Ford, made the truck and made the first car, and then Walt Disney. So there's a lot of people who have still been very successful in spite of all of their in spite of their kind of learning disability. But I thought I'd let you know a little bit about it in case either you might have it or somebody, maybe you have a child that has it, because a lot of times you feel like the child just isn't trying, or you feel like they're just being lazy, but really they found that there are brain abnormalities that happen with dyslexia. So it's interesting. The textbook goes in that they found different brain differences for different cultures. What we find in the United States is because the way that we process language, we see that there are bilaterally symmetrical cortexes. So basically, you remember on that slide where I showed you that the left hemisphere tends to be larger than the right hemisphere? With people with dyslexia, when you do a scan, they're seeing that both sides are the brain are about the same size. Another thing is that they related dyslexia to attention processing. So people without dyslexia seem to be better at being able to focus on one point and be primed by cues. You can read about this in the textbook. But people with dyslexia have a hard time just focusing on one thing a lot of times, and something that would prime them. For a person without dyslexia, the primer will help them locate a stimulus. But people with dyslexia, the primer doesn't seem to help them locate the stimulus. The book also talks about, that one thing that they try to do with dyslexic people is to get them to focus on one thing at a time. So there was a technique that they would use where they cut a hole in a piece of paper, and so that the person wouldn't be exposed to all the words at once, the paper would cover up all the words so they could just see one word at a time. And that seemed to help them be able to read more because there wasn't so much distracting information. But then the book also talks about that it was interesting that even though a lot of them had said their reading had been, well, not a lot of them, I believe that it was a small study, but they had said that their reading had been improved by this process, that they actually liked, they wanted to go back to being dyslexic because they felt that just focusing on one thing, they didn't like it. They liked that they had the ability to be able to pay attention to multiple things at once. Now, the research on our brains, people who don't have dyslexia, say that, all of our multitasking is not good and that we're less efficient. We make many more mistakes with multitasking. But maybe someone with dyslexia is actually a little bit more able to multitask than the average person. So this is something I wanted you to try so you could get a feel of what it might feel like to be dyslexic. Just so in case you ever run into somebody that's dyslexic, maybe you can understand what they go through. So let's say these words together. So red, yellow, blue, green, black, blue, green, red, black. Okay? Whoops, sorry. So if you go through and say all these words, they're pretty easy because the color matches the word. But what if I did this to you? I want you to just say the color. So this one would be yellow, blue, green, black, blue. Do you see? Try it. If you really tried it, I think that you would see that you wanted to read the word black. You wanted to read the word blue. And so you could say green and you kind of had to switch your brain to just like not be distracted by the reading of the word. But when you had two opposing forces competing for your attention, it was much harder to do the second task than the first task, where these matched. So if you could imagine, like, if you don't have dyslexia, reading is very simple, you can do it very easily. But what if you constantly had different competing forces on you? So you had to go really slowly and you had to like really look at it and block off the competing forces. Okay, so basically dyslexia is a pattern recognition disorder. It is related to language. Sometimes what we see is that they may have stuttering problems early on. They don't pick up the language as quickly, but this whole dyslexia tends to affect their ability to read and things like that. And so I wanted you to be aware that they have found brain differences and that it is an absolute diagnosable disorder. However, the way that people diagnose it is usually they look at the symptoms. They can do a brain scan and see that, but we're not to the level that we've actually detected this actually means they have dyslexia, because it's a big pattern recognition disorder. Basically what they're looking for is, do you see a bilaterally symmetrical cortex? Also, left-handed people. So left-handed people are more likely to have dyslexia. And something that we haven't really talked about yet, or left-handedness in the brain, is left-handed people, they tend to have less lateralization than a person that's right-handed. So what that means is, we're bringing it full circle now, is that we talked about lateralization in the very beginning, that the left side of the brain does this and the right side of the brain does that. With left-handed people, both hemispheres tend to do a variety of things. So left-handedness is associated with some negative things, but it's also associated with some great things. So let's look at some examples of left-handedness in the brain. So left-handed people are more likely to stutter. They're more likely to have dyslexia. They're more likely to get migraine headaches. They're more likely to suffer from allergies. They're actually more likely to be involved in accidents. But now, so those are some negative things, but let's look at some positive things. What percentage of the population is left-handed? It's 10%. So, being that, what percentage of people who have done great things, like people in the book Who's Who in America, should be left-handed? It should be 10%, right? 10% of the population, 10% of that book. But when you look at people who have accomplished great things in this world, and like if you used one of those books, Who's Who in America, you would find that approximately 30% of that book is left-handed. So remember back to this dyslexia where I showed you these famous people that have dyslexia? Let's talk about some famous people who are left-handed. Albert Einstein was left-handed. Thomas Edison was left-handed. Michelangelo was left-handed. Leonardo da Vinci was left-handed. Marilyn Monroe was left-handed. Listen to this. Out of the past 6 presidents, 5 of them have been left-handed. Is Obama left-handed? Yes, he is. So it's interesting that you would think that, I mean, look at that. 5 out of the past 6 presidents have all been left-handed. So when you think about those high statistics, being left-handed, it seems to structure the brain differently, kind of like this dyslexia. What we find with left-handed people's brains is they're less lateralized, and we also find that their corpus callosum is thicker. So they tend to have different learning disorders and some different health problems, but they also tend to do incredible things. Now, why would someone be left-handed? So you can have 2 right-handed parents and you could still have a left-handed child. But what they think is due to left-handedness is hormone levels in the womb. You're going to find 5 times as many males who are left-handed as females. So boys are more likely to have all these things like dyslexia, stuttering problems, learning disorders, right? They're more likely to be left-handed. So that what they think causes left-handedness is testosterone levels in the womb. Okay, so I hope I've given you kind of an overview. I hope I've given you, like, if you do have a child that's born with left hand, probably it'd be best to just let them be who they are and not try to force them to write with their right hand. That's probably just going to aggravate them, because left-handed people, yes, you need to know that there are some learning disabilities such as dyslexia and stuttering that are associated with being left-handed, but there's also great things that are associated with being left-handed.